Hey, this is Mitzi. This year I planted some tomatoes and some squash in my flower beds. And I've got what my family calls a mess of squash. So, of course, I can't eat it all at one time. My family loves squash, but not that good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the squash up. I'm going to stew it, and then I'll show you how I make squash fritters, or as my mama used to say, squash cakes. And then the rest of it I'm going to freeze for later.
So I'm going to start out by cutting up my squash. You're going to want to chop off the ends and discard these. You can slice your squash, you can cube your squash, however you want to cut it up is fine. The ones that are going to be used in the squash fritters are going to be mashed up after they're cooked anyway. What we don't use for the squash fritters, I'm going to put in bags and put it in the freezer to be able to use later. You can use yellow squash, you can use zucchini squash. You can even use potatoes and make potato cakes in the same way that I'm making these squash fritters. So you can see I have a lot. I'm going to cook it all. I'm going to freeze part of it after it's cooked. You can actually freeze raw squash, but this just cuts down on one of the steps. When I take it out of my freezer and thaw it out, it's already cooked. I'm going to cover the squash with water, and I'm going to put a lid on this and let it cook until it's just tender enough that you can stick a fork through it easy. Be sure to keep a check on your pot. If your lid is loose, you're going to lose some of the water. Now I'm going to cut up my onion. I'm going to go ahead and chop up about 1/4 of this onion. I'm going to dice it. You cut the ends off and be sure and take off the outer layer. What I don't use, I'll put in a baggie and use on a hot dog or something in the next couple of meals. I'll be sure to use the onion for. I'm using a Vidalia onion. You can use any type of onion you want. I don't recommend the red onion. I recommend a yellow onion or a Vidalia. I'm dicing it up really thin. Some people don't even want onions in their squash fritters. I'm sure my son had rather I didn't put it, but I think it adds a little bit of flavor. And what I'm using is called the rocker method, to be able to chop it up just a little bit finer than what I can just using the knife and cutting straight off the onion. I'm using a slotted spoon. This is already cooked until it's tender enough, and I've let it cool just a little bit. You can strain it. I want to use a little bit of the juices. When you freeze it, you don't have to freeze all the water with it. Just use a little bit of water with your squash. Now I'm going to mash it up, leaving it in pretty good sized chunks. I'm using about 3 cups of squash to make these squash fritters. And you'll hear me say squash fritters, and then I'll say squash cakes, but it's the same. I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt and quite a bit of black pepper. I usually use sea salt. You can see I've put a good amount of black pepper in it. So we're going to stir this up. And now I'm going to be putting 2 eggs. You can go ahead and beat your eggs before you put them in the bowl. I've got this slotted spoon that I'm using, so it does a pretty good job of beating it up, and I've still got the liquid in there from my squash, so it's going to incorporate it pretty good. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add the onion, and I've got a tablespoon, and I'm going to put a couple of heaping tablespoons of onions in it. Next, I'm just adding flour. It is self-rising flour. I'm putting about a cup at a time. It's like making a pancake batter, only it's a little chunky. So if you see it's not quite thick enough, just add some more flour. And I don't think this is going to be quite thick enough, so I'm adding some more. You can tell when you get the right consistency. It's just like pancake mix. So now I'm fixing these in a cast iron skillet. I want to get the skillet heating up, and then before you get it really hot, go ahead and pour some oil in. I'm using a olive oil blend. You can use any type of oil. You can use vegetable oil, canola oil. Just get a good layer of it on your pan. What I like to do is just get a little bit on a spoon and drop it into my pan and watch that little drop, and then when it starts to bubble up, I'll know it's ready. You see, I've put a plate beside of it. Once you get these started, you're going to want a plate to put them on. It's just, like I said, like fixing pancakes. Once that pan gets hot, you're going to keep on until you finish them all up. There's no stopping. So here I'm showing you how I do with a little bit of batter. It's not quite ready, so I'll give it just a couple more minutes. You don't make these as big as a pancake. You want them small. I put about 4 to a pan. And just like pancakes, the first ones, they usually turn out not so good, but once you've got those first done, the rest of them, they end up golden brown and not sticking. So you'll notice these are wanting to stick just a little bit. get one side brown and flip them over. And this one, like I was saying, this is one of the first ones. It's going to stick. So just do the best you can. Don't get rid of the oil out of the first ones. Just scrape it up. Here's my second pan. And you can see it's doing really good.
My mama used to call these squash cakes. You might call them squash fritters, but I just call them good. Real good.
Please like, share, and comment. And as always, thank you for watching Mitzi's Market Fresh Meals.